folks can join us as we go.
Okay. Hi, everybody. This is Digant Behel. I'm the founder and president of Accounting Solutions of New York. I welcome you to this presentation. We have created this presentation for budgeting and reporting and to help the schools to better work and evaluate doing budgeting and reporting the financial aspects of the school. These were kind of our key items which we have put in our introductory item. If you are really fatigued with the financial aspects, I think you have come to the right session, and we will be able to walk you through some of the ways how we can basically reduce some of the stress points in your financial reporting and provide you some useful tips, and also provide some industry standards with this. We have included some of the bio. For me, I've been doing work with in accounting for more than 20 years, and I founded Accounting Solutions about 10 years ago. And we focus on providing accounting services to charter schools and not-for-profits. I have with me here my partner in crime, Zaid Mohammed and Junaid. Zaid, you want to talk 2 minutes?
Sure. I've joined Accounting Solutions only recently in 2019, but have known Digant for many years. When I was looking for a change in doing the traditional CFOO type of work, he invited me to join Accounting Solutions to do some quality control, internal control procedures with his firm, helping look at the clients and their needs, and beefing up what we provide, and trying to make sure that the clients that we have have everything that they need in terms of the financial processes that they undertake, whether it be budgeting or financial reporting or compliance with state and federal and local requirements. So it's been a pleasure. It's a lovely group of people that are in Accounting Solutions. It's a growing group. We have not just in terms of the number of staff, but in terms of the number of clients that we serve. We feel that we provide a really good service, and we could tell that based on the feedback that we get from clients on a regular basis.
Thank you, Zaid.
Sure.
I also have with us our accounting manager, Junaid Haq. Junaid?
Yes, thank you, Digant. Hi, everyone. My name is Junaid Haq. I actually joined Accounting Solutions right before Zaid did, so we kind of have been with the firm for a little more than a year now. So currently I manage 5 different charter schools in New York City. I work with a team of 4 junior staff accountants to do mostly the day-to-day activities, plus the financial reporting, the audit, and help the client be where they need to be in terms of the financial reporting and budgeting aspects. So so currently I manage 5 charter schools. And like Zaid said, we enjoy working with the team. It's a small group, but it's growing. Thank you for joining our sessions today.
Great. The first thing we want to do is help create some quick check-in. I come from a field, from a family full of doctors, so that's why you feel a doctor. So what we would like to do is, if you go on your screen, right where you have signed up, on your right side with the viewers, there are polling questions. So we would like for you to answer some of these quick polling questions. And you can keep a track as to how many polling questions you get right, yes or no. And that will help you in terms of getting a self-evaluation and a check as to how much work needs to be done. Hi, David. We are just getting started. We are going to click on the polling questions on the top right section. And if you guys can answer the polling questions, that will be great. You have to answer the first question, which is, does your school reporting calendar incorporate important deadlines with various agencies? What we are saying here is that if you have a calendar that basically brings on, you have a pretty tidied up calendar that matches your authorizers requirement, your funding agency requirements and stuff internally, and many schools like to put it right in their Google Calendar or whatever. And then the next question is about, does your school board members understand key fiscal factors? This is primarily focused on if some of the key factors being the student in this business or in this service, really one of the biggest key factor is student, and then the amount of this money we spend on salaries. So some of the components or the key factors you can just evaluate. These are really quick. If you have a finance committee that meets at least 6 times a year, I'm not sure if you have built-in systems to automatically, the finance committee meets at least once every other month. It is a good practice to have a fixed schedule to have. So if you have answered yes to that, you will get 1 point, and we will come at the end and kind of tally up the points. And the next is, if your school records its annual budget in its accounting system, we normally suggest that all the schools record their annual budget in their accounting system, whether it's QuickBooks or Peachtree or MIP or whatever may be, so that you can create the budget versus actual right from your accounting system. And next is to utilize appropriate accounting system to enhance the processes. This is basically some ways. For example, if you are using QuickBooks, you can generate certain programmatic reports, whether how much money you are spending on middle school or high school, or how much money you have spent on ABC donors restricted grant. Are you able to generate those kind of reports directly from your accounting system, or are you using Excel reports for that? If you are able to get that information right from accounting software, that's good. If not, your systems probably need some enhancements or can become more efficient. Next is, if your school provides appropriate training to everybody with the fiscal policies and procedures manual. We often find that sometimes, the staff who is required to meet certain items in the fiscal manual is actually not been trained in that. So there's obviously a gap. So you do want to provide proper annual training to everybody who is required to do certain aspects of your fiscal procedures. Next is, school has an updated, independently reviewed fiscal policies. Sometimes we see in our practice or stuff, school's internal bookkeeper is the only one who has the fiscal policies and procedures manual, and only he or she reviews it. As you can kind of understand that that can result in some sort of segregation of duties piece. So you really need to get it independently reviewed once a year or so, and as a part of your independent audit, your independent auditor should kind of look at that, and more than likely your independent auditor would use the Fiscal Policies and Procedures Manual as a starting point to evaluate how your school is doing in terms of its procedures. If next question is, does your school prepare an annual departmental budget? Like I mentioned before, there are some schools that want to prepare a departmental budget, whether it is by a project-based learning. So if you have a project-based learning, you want to incorporate that project piece. Let's say you have a science department, you want to incorporate that science department's needs into the budget. Does your school prepare a long-term 5-year or so? This is different than what you prepared as a part of the charter authorization. This is really as a part of your strategic plan, because once you have been chartered, you should have a different sort of a strategic plan if that was not prepared as a part of the charter application. And the first one is, if your school prepares an annual budget prior to the start of the school year. I'm not really sure as to how we can get some feedback on these, but if you did answer those questions and you got less than 5, the recommendation is, or the benchmark would be that your school can need some substantial improvements in the financial systems. But if you have 6 through 9, there are significant ways. There are ways that it can still evaluate and make key improvements. But if you are 10, according to various state items, what on this 10 might sound like, hey, you are doing fabulous, but that is really the sort of the bar that some of the authorizers want the schools to be at. So it is just, you might feel that you have ran a marathon, but it is really basically just meeting the authorizers' expectations. So I just wanted to kind of put it out there that 10 means that you are meeting the, in most of the cases, the authorizers' recommended expectations. With that, I would hand over to Zaid, who would walk us through some of the budgeting piece.
Yeah. You know, as we know, the budgeting process is a very important aspect of financial operations. Having a good idea as to what the needs of the organization of the school is in terms of its scarce financial resources and its programmatic and operational needs is very important to make sure that those are in alignment. And so there are certain procedures that need to take place in order for that to be a correct, an efficient, a productive, and a meaningful exercise. And, you know, I'll just run through this at a very high level. And, you know, if folks have questions, they could send them to us. At the end, we'll tell you how to reach out to us and things like that. So one of the most important things is always to start your budget on time. If you habitually start maybe a month or even 2 months before the end of the fiscal year, you find yourself running out of time, gathering the information that you need, pulling together the people that you need information from. You always tend to, you know, to run into issues. Starting too late doesn't present an opportunity for the proofing of the budget, presenting it to maybe the finance committee for review and for critique, or presenting it to even stakeholders within the school to understand, if the numbers reflect the true needs of the departments or the different parts of the organization. Involving the right people is always critically important. Sometimes you may find that a budget is done only by the finance folks, the accountant at the school, without input from key stakeholders. It's not a good idea to do that. Involving all the right people allows you to prepare and present a more accurate budget that's reflective of the needs of the school. To take, for instance, if I, as a CFO, were to simply take a look at, last year's actual data and add a factor onto that, for inflation or whatever, and use that as the budget, you tend to quite frequently miss very important things that are forthcoming. And you would find that when you look at your budget versus your actual at some future point in time, that they are not in alignment. And then you realize, we forgot to include this and we forgot to include that. So involving the right people, the facilities manager, for instance, he'll tell you, the HVAC system is falling apart. We need to invest in that. Or the development person, the person in charge of fundraising, might say to you, we had a really good feeling about this grant or that grant, and we thought that that it was going to come in, but it's not going to come in. So it means we have to modify certain things to make sure that all of these things are considered. And that, making sure that your budget, don't begin the budgeting process assuming that, your budget is going to be the same as it was last year, because things change, circumstances change. Maybe you've added a class and you need more teachers. To take last year without considering all these things is kind of a dangerous procedure, in that, again, you miss certain key events that are forthcoming. And when you look at your budget versus your actual, you're scrambling to understand why there are such huge variances. At the end of the year, you would realize that you've missed your target. And one of the things that we like to do at Accounting Solutions is to budget at the lowest level of detail. And what does that mean? That means taking your chart of accounts. This is how you capture your expenses, and budgeting at that very low level, meaning that when you're done with the budget, every single line item in your chart of accounts will have, and that's what Digant referred to earlier, inputting your budget once it's complete into your accounting software, so you can track your actual expenditures versus your budgeted expenses. That would become a very difficult thing to do if you do not budget at the line item level. Okay, so those are just some things, about the do's on budgeting. Maybe we can move on to Digant. We can move on to talking a little bit about some of the pitfalls of the budgeting of a budgeting process. You want to move to the next slide?
Yeah, this one?
Okay. No, the next one after that.
This one.
Okay. So, if you answer yes to any of these questions that I'm going to propose, you might want to re-examine and reconsider the way you do your budgets. For instance, if you, as a standard practice, take last year's actual results and apply an across-the-board percentage increase, and consider that to be your budget for the next year, you would have indulged yourself in an oversimplified approach that really ignores current and near-term changes taking place within the school and within the business environment. And the bottom line is that while historical data is a good reference point, and it's a good starting point too, if you rely on it as the primary methodology, as the primary means of arriving at your budget, it's not just oversimplified. It's quite a lazy process in that you're not investing your time and effort in gathering very important information that could affect the way the school operates. And like I said before, the results can be very disheartening. If your accounting department does the budget, all by itself, without, involving others, it could lead to problems too, because again, very important bits of information that affect the budget and the budgeting process will be missed. As I spoke earlier, if the facilities manager, for instance, is not consulted in the budgeting process, how would you know what your capital needs are, for instance? And that's, very capital expenditures, as you know, can be quite large. And if you miss these kinds of things, your budget will be rendered relatively, not meaningless, but it would not capture the true needs of the organization. Just as a general rule, getting broad participation from all levels of staff would be a good way of gathering very important information that you, as the accountant or the accounting department alone, will not be able to tell. When budgeting, if you don't take into consideration cash flows, it's also a dangerous procedure. What do I mean by that? When you prepare a budget, for instance, you consider revenues and you consider expenses. Revenue could be an accrual concept in that it's money that you expect, but you may not necessarily receive during the course of the year. So you don't want to plan expenditures, which tend to be of a cash nature, against revenue that is strictly of an accrual nature, because what may happen if you do not have the reserves, you may run into issues in terms of financing your obligations. So you always want to prepare your budget in such a way that it considers the actual inflows of cash, not just the actual outflows. And one of the things that's very seldom done, and again, it goes hand in hand with what I just said, is, do you consider the impact of non-cash or accrual expenditures when budgeting? So you know that, most board members, most folks are concerned about the actual inflow of cash versus the actual outflow of cash. But one of the things that you want to also consider when you're preparing the budget is to have an idea as to what your audited financial results are going to look like, because your financial statements are prepared on an accrual basis. So that would consider things like depreciation, which you may not have in the budget. You may consider something like accrued expenses, unpaid salaries that are an obligation to the school. And you may have something like, if you're renting your facilities, deferred rent. And these are all big ticket items that when considered in the audit will produce a result very different from if you just consider just the cash aspect. So preparing a budget that incorporates all of this is a very important thing to do. It informs you as to what your financial statements will look like. And, I know schools rely mostly on the per pupil funding to cover expenses, but if you are undertaking, let's say, a capital campaign, for instance, or you want to undergo fundraising, and, there are people who look at your financial statements and what they see is an accrual set of numbers. So when they look, if you totally neglect the impact of these accrual things that I mentioned, depreciation, deferred rent, accrued salaries, if you ignore the impact of those in your financial statements, you will, you may not impress a potential donor as much as you would want to. Okay, we just covered that, Digant. Then we just covered that, Digant. So you can move on to the next. Okay, and this one we just covered too. So the budgeting process. The biggest expense for any school, of course, would be the personnel. So a good first step in budgeting is to do a complete review of personnel in terms of what you currently have and in terms of what your future needs are. And to not just make ballpark estimates on, things like the fringe benefits, but understanding what your needs are in terms of your staffing for things like medical insurance, which can be very costly. If you do not factor in things like the actual premiums and the cost to the school, you can fall short in that area. Understanding that, fringe benefits, particularly medical insurance, is something that, can jump 10, 15% the next year, and not factoring those increases into your budget is something that could have unpleasant results. We talked before about preparing the budget at the finest level of detail, the chart of accounts level. Do not spare any opportunity to review and review again, present proof to the finance committee, and making sure that you take input from as many people as you can in building a budget. That's one of the other reasons why time has to be considered. You don't want to start at a point when it doesn't afford you the opportunity to share information with stakeholders within the school to get the feedback on a timely basis. So, starting, some people may find this a little too much, but starting maybe, 4 months before the end of the fiscal year would be a good idea. Okay. You can move on to the next slide. Okay. So once the budgeting is done and we have a really good budget and we've entered the budget into QuickBooks or any accounting software that you use, and the next thing that comes along would be, your monthly board meetings or your every 2 months board meeting, or quarterly board meeting, however many meetings that you have. It's time to generate financial reports so that those in governance can look at the financial performance of the school and be able to, on a timely basis, give input in the oversight process. This is only a meaningful process if your financial reports are accurate and timely and meaningful. It's the information that the board receives must be, complete, meaning that all of your income and expense transactions are captured on a timely basis and completely and accurately, and presenting it in a report, not just a lot of folks simply do an export of QuickBooks, a P&L from QuickBooks, which compares your actual expenses to your budget, and deem that sufficient. But when you're presenting to a board or a finance committee, they do not have the time to look through all of those because it usually is generated in a quite difficult to read format. And we at Accounting Solutions believe that the extra effort in preparing a set of financials that are easy to read and meaningful to a board member or to a member of the finance committee is critically important, in that it allows them to see the information that they need to provide the appropriate oversight and input into the financial affairs of the school. We can show you what one of our financial report looks like. We present a mixture of information in a graphical format, because we have board members who are quite sophisticated and understand how to read graphical information quite easily and can decipher that kind of information quite easily. And then we have others who prefer things in a tabular format. So we present a financial report that contains some graphical information. For instance, we look at the performance of the school over a certain number of years. It allows members of the board of directors and the finance committee to see trends, to understand what's happening with the school, and to make a determination as to whether or not any kind of action needs to be taken. We also include in our financial report key fiscal indicators. What are these? These are benchmarks that must be met according to NICEAD. Things like your liquidity ratios. So we gather information, historical information, and we translate that into a fiscal dashboard that anyone could look at and make conclusions on how the school is performing. In addition, we include a narrative that summarizes key information about the actual performance versus the budget. And what that does, it allows the board member not to have to sift through tables and then come up with questions. We save them the trouble of having to do that. So we kind of offer an explanation as to what is happening with the financials as we go. Because as you can tell, to run through a table full of numbers presents a challenge for a board member to decipher what is happening. Then a lot of questions are answered later on, and sometimes it's too late. So what we try to do is to cover all that information in our financial reports as we go.
Yeah. Thank you, Zaid.
Sure.
I kind of in this virtual setting, it's difficult to get some questions, but if you have any questions or comments, I think you can put it what's on your mind section. I see Kathy has mentioned and Ken has mentioned, but if you guys have any questions or comments, please feel free to add them in the what's on your mind section. The last thing that we wanted to briefly talk about is doing some sort of a self-assessment and seeing if you are doing the financial reports on time and if they are informative and these kind of things which we have listed here. But the aim here is really that generally from our experience, these are the things that tend to be the pain points, so to speak, for an executive leader, or whether it's an executive director or a board member or a decision maker. These are the things that we hear and we circle back time over time, that these are the pain points. If the fiscal audit is not completed on time, it obviously can cause a lot of anxiety towards the end of the year. If staff is not trained properly or does not perform the duties in a timely and in a correct manner, then obviously the key decision making gets flawed. The way I like to see it really is the accounting piece is as if you have to hit a basket, and if from the start on the other side of the quote, the bookkeeper doesn't do the job properly or correctly, all the way to the treasurer and the CFO delivering the right financial package, if then obviously the basket wouldn't be taken or scored. With that, I think we are towards the end of our presentation. We want to thank all of you. And if you have any questions, I see, David, you might be having some internet issue, looks like, because it keeps on going back and forth for you. Unless you are doing hopping, which I doubt you are. So if anybody else has any comments, I hear Ken has mentioned.
I think Kenneth had a question that we meet monthly as a finance committee. What would you discuss in the semi-annual detailed discussion? I think most of our schools, Kenneth, do meet on a monthly basis. I think something that should happen at the end of the first quarter or midway is the budget should be proofed in the context of actual results and any expected changes coming up in the future. And if a budget modification needs to be made, it should be made at that point in time. We should, not much happens in a school in August and maybe September a little bit. Things really get rolling once you're back in session, except for this year, this crazy year that we've been having. But at the end of the first quarter, you may not know a whole lot, but certainly by the end of the second quarter, you can tell if there are going to be major changes, and you could factor that in as a projection or as a modification, depending on how severe the anticipated changes would be.
So there are generally 3 or 4 key points of time. First would be, in the month, like how Zaid mentioned, towards the end of the calendar year. But let's step back for 1 second. You would start your budgeting process around March or April, and that would be your first important meeting. Then you would have an important meeting at the end of June to present the fiscal budget to the full board, and then another meeting would be somewhere between November or December, when you have the actual data and you can make certain projections. So those are the key items or the key meeting points. Incorporating some of these key meeting points in your ongoing calendar is a useful way to stay on top of things. And it all just goes down to, really, it's not a rocket science. It just goes through a very simple and a basic process of making sure that some of the basic stuff keeps on getting done on a timely basis. And that all results in a good financial report and a package and a discipline about it. Anything else you want to add, Saeed?
No, I just, in these days and times, it's so critically important, because of all the uncertainty around funding and, threats to cut charter school funding and all these kinds of things. I think it's all the more important for particularly board members to be very, very vigilant and, to stay informed about what's happening in that environment. As we know, most charter schools, the per pupil funding is everything. It finances the entire operation. So any chance that there would be an interference with that you must be cognizant of things that are happening politically and economically. So and that's why, to Kenneth's question, it's just about making sure that at some point in time during the course of the year, the discussion is not just about budget versus actual, but what's happening in the environment, and what are the potential impacts on the school.
David has just asked a good question. Thanks for asking that, David. What are the tools or approaches that help a charter school board member understand how to read financial statements? We actually have done some sessions on providing training to boards and providing, oversight to board, but it all boils down to what are the key fiscal factors. And I think if the organization can have a very simple dashboard, which is digestible to all the board members, that would be a first start. And in that dashboard, you can have really, some simple tools, whether it is days of cash on hand or enrollment or, number of personnel. You can break down a lot of the financial information in 5 or 6 key factors. I generally find that some of the folks who might not have detailed knowledge of financial statements might find it really easy to grasp just 5 or 6 key points. And then those key points can just be somewhat of a thinking behind, like I said, cash on hand or stuff or enrollment. They would just be a very good indicator of the financial health of the school. I do think that charter school board members do a lot of good work, and as far as the authorizers are concerned, they take all of the compliance, whether it is educational or administrative. They put it in a box and they send it to the board chair. So it kind of ends back on the school leader's role to train and provide some, guidance to the board members and the board leaders, whether it's the board chair or your treasurer. So that's what I generally see. And if you can have some of that financial health tie back to the student success, that would be really great, because often student success tends to be a non-financial number. You might have a student success in terms of meeting or exceeding the district rate. So you might have to create a fiscal a key factor relating to that. I hope that helps. Anything else you want to add to that, Raid or Junaid?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question that was asked by David. I think, David, understanding the budget in the terms, and we talked about the importance of the staffing piece. One of the most important things when it comes to student success is making sure that you have the staffing that'll take you there, that'll make you successful in terms of your student success. I think a charter school or any school's success is measured in terms of the success of the students. Making sure that the budget is reflective of the true needs of the student population, and that entails not just looking at the budget, but making sure that conversations are had with the principal or school leadership in general, to ensure that you have the right kind of staffing, because good teachers make good students is kind of my philosophy. So understanding that. Additionally, you want to make sure that the resources are being provided to the students and the teachers, and you look at things like your school operating costs, like textbooks and classroom materials, to make sure that a sufficient amount is budgeted to allow the kind of learning that you need to have happen to produce successful students. So there are the fiscal the budget is not just fiscal measures, but there are also other kinds of quantitative as well as qualitative things that have to be looked at in conjunction with the budget to make sure that the budget is reflective of the school's need, not just in terms of just operating, but in terms of addressing what is needed to make students successful.
Great.
You know, even something like making sure that the air conditioner is running well, because in summertime you have hot classrooms, the students are not going to function optimally. You know, making sure that the budget is reflective of all these kinds of things and not missing these items. There is a tendency to want to have a huge surplus at the end of the year, and that may not be something that complements student success. I think it's more important to make sure that the budget contains all of the things that are needed to facilitate learning in the classroom.
Yep. I hope that was helpful. I see, David, that you might have hopped off, but I know that this session is getting recorded, so that might be of help. You have asked another question. I see the boards and financial service providers looking at and talking about financials in a way that is disconnected from student academic success and wellness. Glad to hear you're pushing those conversations with the school. Yeah, we obviously, you know, take this thing very seriously. The aim in life is not to die rich. You know, the aim is really to have a good life and enjoy the life and stuff. So I think that goes back to in this context, the reason I all thought about that quote is not to be thinking that, hey, if you must save money and do this, you know, at the end of the day, we are in a not-for-profit world. You know, we want to do the right thing. We want to do provide the right education and work in really difficult ways. So that's all it should be looked at, and that's our view as a team, really.
Yeah. I think, David, our success is not just about delivering fancy financial results, but being associated with schools that have a high success rate with their students. I think that's something that we try to, as much as we can, you know, offer advice on, of course, from a financial perspective.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everybody. I think we want to just leave 4 or 5 minutes sooner so that you get a quick break. If there is any other session you want to attend right after this, if any of you want to give me a call, my email or my cell phone is listed here. Please feel free to give me a buzz for a free consultation. It doesn't really, you know, cost anything. And I hope I can help you, and I meet you again in our charter world.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.